The field of 68 is set. This is what college basketball lives for. March Madness. This is the College Game Day podcast, late night edition, immediately after the bracket unveil for St. Patrick's Day, March 17th. Rece Davis and Pete Thamel here. Pete, as we did last year, though I think we're going to do so a little more expeditiously. We're going to run through each region and we'll go one at a time. I think by the time this podcast drops, it's a little bit late to start, complaining about snubs and whether Indiana State should have gotten in and why Pittsburgh was left out in favor, St. John's in favor of, Mountain West teams or whatever. I think the one thing overall, big picture in this bracket that's pretty interesting is the 4 number 1 seeds. 3 of them are coming off losses in their conference tournament. That's not unprecedented, but it's not typical. It happened. This is the 4th time. But 2 of the previous 3 times were years in which the 1 seeds, 3 of the 1 seeds those years, all came from one conference. So it was virtually impossible, to have a bunch of teams coming in off wins. But I think it's pretty clear when we'll start in the East that UConn is the number 1 overall seed. Doesn't mean they'll win, but they're the best team. And so that's probably where we should start.
Yeah, we should start there. I was a little disappointed you chose to not ask Danny Hurley about his underwear choice, Rece, on television when given the opportunity to. You caved into the pragmatic peer pressure of Billis.
Dragons and sharks, though. We've been through all of that.
Teddy Thamel would love that, man. He would. Those are his jam right now. No, it's kind of UConn versus everybody, which is fun, right? Hurley is such a delicious character for a game that needs new faces and new characters, new villains. If you go that way, or a new look, if you win back-to-back titles, you're going to be a Hall of Famer. So that's he's right on that cusp of that, and he is authentically himself, right? You see him jawing with the with the red jacketed Patino crony in the Garden, or it was Providence, and then there was another game too where he had
Creighton.
some. It was Creighton. That's right. Yes, it was Creighton. Yeah, where he had some not so not PG-13 words for different fans, but that's who he is. That's who he's been since I got to know him when he was coaching in Newark as a prep school coach. And the Hurleys have remained authentically Jersey City themselves, and so it will be fun to see if this group, which is really playing well right now, right, and can win in different ways, has great guards, has they're rare great big in college basketball. It's gonna be really fun to see if they can go do it.
I just don't know who's going to beat them if they don't play their B- game, because, but I will say that the East bracket, one thing, I want to go back to the Creighton story just for a second.
Yeah.
I got a lot of mileage after that because College Game Day went to UConn right after the Creighton thing. So when I was firing up the crowd, I did it in the scene set, but I did it with a little more energy before the show started. I told them, how they were the greatest program. They were the standard in college basketball, and I didn't care about these other programs. And anybody who didn't agree with that, I will knock you out, which is what Danny said to the fan who yelled something to him as he was leaving the court in Creighton. But as you look at this East bracket, the one thing that struck me, and I asked Charles McClelland, who is the chair of the selection committee, about this, that is a loaded bracket, but you have to take into account some recency bias. What I mean by that is that you have, in the East region, you have 4, including UConn, power conference tournament champions. You have Auburn, who won the SEC. You have Illinois, who won the Big Ten. You have Iowa State, who won the Big 12, the conference that many said was the best in college basketball over the course of the season. You also have, in UConn's half of the bracket, 2 teams who were in the Final Four last year in Florida Atlantic and San Diego State. And while San Diego State is fairly different, although they have some pieces back, FAU is largely intact from what it was last year. So that is I think that while UConn is the clear number 1 overall seed, and they, as McClelland said, they got their choice of locale, which I've got other issues with that. We won't delve into that here on the podcast necessarily. But they got, in my judgment, the most difficult road.
Yeah, I don't think it's really close to be honest. I mean, Iowa State's playing gangbusters right now. I mean, they just whooped Houston, which nobody does. Houston, that game's a little closer. A lot of people might be picking Houston to win this thing. And they have a decent path. Not probably as good as Purdue's. So yeah, look, Iowa State, they start in Omaha, which I mean, they can turn Hilton in any direction, right? I think that's west, but a little bit south, maybe. I'm usually pretty good at my geography. Yeah, a little bit south, a little bit west too, maybe, hopefully. I consult my Counting Crows album for where in Middle America. That is. But yeah, like if on Saturday night in Boston, which I will be lucky to be covering, it is UConn Iowa State for a bid for the Final Four on the line. I think that's some pretty good theater.
And it's going to be full of UConn people.
Oh yeah, and they've known this for months.
No, they don't. And I think the other thing too is if you look at what potentially could be there, Auburn believes it's built for March. Bruce Pearl has been preaching that. He's been talking to his team. We always talk about don't look ahead. He told them we can win 9 games in a row starting in Nashville. Well, they won the first 3 and they won them convincingly for the most part. They got they got a pretty good fight from Mississippi State, but they won convincingly, won the SEC, and I don't think that's a team that's not going to be afraid of UConn. They're not as good as them. Even though they're top 10 in offensive efficiency, Auburn is the only team in the country that is in the top 10 in offensive and defensive efficiency. UConn misses by 1. I want to say UConn's 11th, maybe in defensive efficiency, but basically statistically, these two teams are kind of a cut above. But I think the difference is Auburn doesn't always look like that to me because sometimes Auburn doesn't have elite shot makers. And so they can get stuck a little more often than UConn does, but they're deep. They can throw a lot of bodies at you. They've got size and length, a number of ball handlers. They've got guards that can get up under you and pressure you, which is probably the only way to get UConn out of sorts. So, if that is indeed the Sweet 16 matchup, UConn will have its hands full no matter what the crowd's doing.
Yes, it would be Bruce Pearl, who pride of Sharon, Massachusetts, coming home to where he was once the Boston College Eagle.
Yes,
as the mascot. I think he was a manager there. He was definitely like the Eagle once, and people have made it out to be like he was like he had a COVID year of Eagle time. So
well, don't let the facts get in the way of a good story, right?
Never.
And that is, and Bruce isn't one to do that either.
No. Bruce is there's an entertainer charmer to Bruce Pearl. He would certainly enjoy soaking it in. It was a really nice moment today after the SEC title game with Marty Smith. I don't know if you caught that, Rece, where Bruce talked about his dad. He got emotional. His dad had passed in August, and he was happy for his team, and he made a point to say that. But you could tell he said he wished his dad was here. It was Marty Smith at his best, and it was raw, emotional Bruce Pearl at his best.
Yeah, and Bruce, Bruce's son Steven is his lead assistant, or one of his lead assistants at Auburn. So a real family affair. Now, you promised before we started this that your big takeaway from the first region we would do would include, I would assume, a Northeast guy taking aim and taking swings at the Mountain West, which prior to San Diego State's run to the title game last year really had not enjoyed the tournament. There have been bucket loads of futility in the NCAA tournament from the Mountain West. Yet they set a conference record by getting 6 teams in the field, including the Aztecs.
So 11-game losing streak last year, Rece, the Mountain West had until San Diego State beat Charleston. And last year, the Mountain West got 4 teams in, and everyone obviously remembered they were counting the units in the Mountain West. Gloria Navarez, I felt like I saw her every day, the commissioner, because they were, they won 5 games. But Utah State lost in the first round last year. Nevada lost, and Boise lost. One of those was in the first 4. So anyway, it's a remarkable run, the greatest run in league history, sandwiched around like a pretty fantastic run of futility. And so I chose the East to talk about the Mountain West because San Diego State as the 5 here playing UAB is really a fascinating moment, right? Because ultimately, I think one of the great guys, a lot of people are going to be listening to this, driving to work, want to pick their bracket. What do you need help picking your bracket for? So I always kind of try to figure out the leagues that I thought were best and to go with the leagues, right? So I don't think the Mountain West is of the ilk where you want a bunch of these teams going deep. Now, I actually kind of like New Mexico, and some of it is like you catch a team late at night and you watch them. They got great guards. They got Mashburn's kid. Like you get a little, you get a little swept up in your sort of selective poaching watching. But this San Diego State team, I don't think is of the caliber of last year's team, which had a bunch of older COVID guys. Jaden Ledee went from like 5 points a game to 20. Yeah. I mean, just one of the, I mean, it's great reason. It warms my heart that there are still stories like that in college basketball, that you stick around, you develop, you wait your turn, and then you go seize the moment. So all credit to him. But I think in the macro, we're going to pick some upsets here. It's probably hinting on where I'm going. I would be bearish on the Mountain West. I would not be bullish on the Mountain West. I'd be bearish on the Mountain West with their 6 teams in Boise, Colorado State, Nevada, San Diego State, New Mexico, and Utah State. Clearly, the committee was bearish on them because the seeding was not, was a lot of people were remarking low. But I just have a hard time going all in on a league that hasn't shown it's of the right timber in the postseason.
I tend to agree with you on all fronts, and when we get to the West, you might find that I too share your bullishness on Richard Pitino's team after Rick Pitino's team was one of the perceived snubs. St. John's was top 25 in Ken Palm's rankings, and they didn't make it. But Richard's team did. And it's almost like that New Mexico team, and we'll get to that. They've got a lot of famous fathers now making names for themselves. UAB is a great story. Andy Kennedy is a terrific coach. Alejandro Vasquez was a guy who, really helped them run through the tournament, win the American. Yaxel Lendeborg is their leading scorer, shot blocker. Eric Gaines is a guy that Andy and Philip Pearson sort of built things around there in Birmingham. They have a little tournament moxie to them. So, I think UAB's
Philip Pearson's that little Alabama drop I sense there.
And Georgia, do you know what?
Yeah.
Philip Pearson shared with, I probably shouldn't say this. Philip Pearson didn't share this. I got this secondhand from Philip Pearson's former boss, Mark Fox. They had a great run at Georgia.
Great guy.
And Georgia, I saw Foxy the other day. And boy, I may get in trouble for dropping this, but that's what podcasts are for. Georgia, since those guys left there, they need to go on a 55-game winning streak to match what Fox and company did while they were at Georgia. That guy's a good coach too, by the way. And people are nuts if they don't hire him. He's, maybe it doesn't win the press conference, but he's really, really good. So what is the big upset? Is that the one you're picking in the East? You're taking UAB to beat San Diego State?
So I am going to take UAB. I always feel like you have to go into the bracket with a couple core strategies and generally stick to them, right? You don't want a strategy of exceptions. It's like the NFL draft. You can't have a bunch of 5'8" corners, but you can really like Mikey Sainrisville, right? And you can maybe get away with one on your own. So I feel like if my core strategy is going to be to go against the Mountain West, I have to take UAB there if I don't think they're going to go far. And I also really like Auburn. I heard you say on one of the 11 shows that you were on today that you thought they were misseeded, and I would tend to agree with that. I would think a lot of the commentary today basically was distilled to not a surprising development, by the way. The conference tournaments don't mean anything for seeding because, just Auburn was dominant. They were really, really good. And you would just think that with their general body of work and how they've closed, they would be better than a 4 in the, staring down UConn. So I don't think either of those teams get by Auburn. So I always take the risk on the upset if you think the one that there's zero chance that they're gonna pop the next game. So.
Yeah, that's I agree with you. That's how you try to pick the upset. Look, if you want to pick FAU, to go to the Final Four, have at it, because more times than not, you're not going to be correct. Mm-hmm. What you try to do is say, okay, who's vulnerable? Who might get there? Try to find a double-digit seed where the bracket's going to break open for them and have an opportunity to do so. I don't really see it in the East in terms of a big upset. The only seed line upset, and I don't know what the odds will say, But the only seed line upset that I have is I do have Drake beating Washington State. I think Washington State's run out of gas a little
Yeah,
bit.
I do.
So
I'm going to pick that one too.
yeah, so that's a 10/7, but I'm not going to be surprised if Drake's actually favored to win that game in terms of
Mhm.
in terms of the spread. But that's a seed line upset. I like the UAB one. Couldn't pull the trigger on it. Going to go with San Diego State because I do think
Fair.
they're tough. They're seasoned, and I think they'll be fine. But I don't think they can beat Auburn. So I would probably pick Auburn to go a little bit farther. Um,
Yeah.
were they not squared off against UConn in the Sweet 16? And maybe they're a little misseeded, but I will say this. They really didn't have any quad one wins to speak of until the tournament.
Mhm.
So I understand the rationale. They're probably, and I try not to complain too much about seeding because of bracketing principles. They can move teams up or down one line. So it's not unreasonable to think that maybe Auburn was somehow a 3 and they wound up a 4 because
Mhm.
they had to move some teams around. So that's
They
not
had
a
to move
big,
all the teams from Alabama to Spokane. That was the rule this year.
yeah. Is that, are all of them out there? Is
I
that,
believe I believe they are all out there. Yeah, all three. So the treasurer at AL.com who has to manage the flights and budgets is probably pretty happy. They'll get some bang for their buck for the 4 connections you need to take from Birmingham to go to Spokane.
okay. So as we go through that bracket, then
Mhm.
is that those are the only 2 upsets? You're going UAB and we're both going Drake. And we're talking again,
Yeah.
for you hardcore gamblers out there, I know we're talking seed line upsets. So
Yeah.
we're going Drake and you're going UAB. I'd like to see, I'm not rooting, but I'd be happy for Andy Kennedy if they get that one. So I think this road in the East is the most difficult one for everybody involved. In the bottom half of that bracket, sometimes in March, you look for guys who can carry you to a championship. UConn had it with Kemba Walker in 2011, and Illinois might very well have it with Terrence Shannon Jr., who had legal problems surrounding a rape allegation, and a judge's order earlier in the season allowed him and reinstated him to the team. Illinois won the Big Ten tournament. He went for 40 in the semis and went for 36 in the championship game. And I think they'll play Iowa State in the Sweet 16. And as much as I like Iowa State and think they're a really good team, really impressed beating Houston 2 of 3, I like Illinois to get to the Elite Eight game against UConn. What do you think?
And we sat there in Phoenix walking into the media day on Thursday, and the final 4 was UConn, Iowa State, Illinois, and Auburn. I'd be like, it's a pretty good final 4.
You feel
Final
that's pretty
four.
good. Yeah,
It's
it's
a
a
pretty
good
good final
Final
4.
Four. Yeah.
I mean, yeah. I'm going to pick UConn. I just think
Me too.
I don't know if I'm going to pick them all the way, but I'm going to pick UConn out of here. I just think living in Boston, I have some biases to this. Every person I know who loves UConn has had their tickets since like December 1st, and I just think you can pick somebody to win a road game in the NCAA tournament, but it's hard, man. Like I think about Syracuse going through Albany in 03. Ask Kelvin Sampson about that game sometimes.
Yeah.
It's just, yeah, it's just hard. And look at the home road splits. And this is anecdotal more than I have the numbers in front of me in college basketball this year. It's just been, it's hard for teams to win road games against somebody like UConn. And that fan base, man, look what they do to the Garden. And they're going to turn it to the Garden North. So, and they're really good. They can win a lot of different ways. They're balanced. They're big. They're tough. They're well coached. So, but I will probably take Iowa State, Rece, over Illinois, even though Illinois has played really well. I just really feel like it's sort of like the great starless team, and they're tough. And again, leagues we're bullish on. I'm going to stay bullish on the Big 12 for some, for obvious reasons. I don't think anyone's arguing that the Big 12 is the is the best team, but you've got Gilbert, Lipsy.
I'm not convinced it's a cut above anybody else. I'm
Really?
just going to say it because
Okay.
I don't know that they're that great offensively. And
Okay.
you got to be able to score. They've got great teams. And Kansas at full strength is certainly much better than it's playing right now. But I like Iowa State, and it won't shock me if they win the game, Pete.
Mhm.
But, you know, I'm not so locked in on Big 12 teams necessarily,
Okay.
or Big 10. I'm sort of it's sort of just a little gut feel. Illinois is hot,
Yeah.
but a lot of times you
Sure.
find teams that get hot and
Yeah.
then they win their conference tournament. There's that euphoric feeling,
Hmm.
and then they can't back it up, which is why. I had a conversation with Jim Boeheim. He thinks NC State's going to make another run. I think NC State did what it came to do, and I think we'll get to them later on. They're over in the South. I think they'll lose first game
Hmm.
because of the emotional energy expended. I'm going to take UConn, and I'm going to go ahead and not mind at all foreshadowing. I'm going to have to see it. I'll have to see them get beat in a meaningful game before I believe it. I think UConn's going to win the national championship again.
Yeah.
So.
I've not filled out the whole bracket in sort of I've been doing like selective research to get ready for this, but I guess I just don't know who else I would pick. Like, I don't have conviction. I
Right.
made like if the bet, and again, we don't bet, the bet was Field versus UConn, I would really have to think about it.
Mhm.
Would you take Field or UConn?
Well, I mean, your odds are always better if you take the field because you have more chances. And anybody, as you know, I like to say, anybody can step on a rake and
Yeah.
hit themselves in the face and blow a game. I mean,
Hmm.
nobody's invincible, and
Hmm.
but I just think they're the best team. So if you're asking me, do I think there's a pretty, maybe significance overstating it, but if there is a noticeable margin in terms of being complete, and being able to do a lot of different things. To have Samson Johnson show up one day. Where's he been? Oh, here he is dunking the ball. Hey, Alex
Hmm.
Caravans, he's still on the team. Oh, watch him
Oh
go for
yeah.
25. So it's like that every night. Seth Greenberg has called it whack-a-mole. It's like the
Yeah.
whack-a-mole thing. You knock down one of the moles. Oh, look over here at this guy over here. Here comes Tristan Newton with a triple double. So I think that there's a little bit of a margin between UConn and the rest. So I'm picking UConn to come out of there, and I think they'll win the national championship again.
Yeah.
So
I'm certainly not going to like boisterously argue with that, but I do think it's good when we don't get along on this sometimes. Sometimes in football, I feel like we
it's
think too
coming.
similarly because
Yeah,
we're like both pretty grounded and pragmatic. So
yeah.
I'm gonna have to be I'm gonna have to be a little bit of fly in the ointment and disagree some here.
But maybe we'll do that when we get to the West region, which we will do as we continue on our previews of the NCAA tournament. Both of us having UConn coming out of the East. Once play gets started, we will preview the West. If you continue to download podcasts wherever you prefer to get your podcast. Field of 68 is set. We continue on the College Game Day podcast, previewing the entire field, region by region. Let's take a look, Pete Thamel, at the West, where North Carolina is the number one seed. That shouldn't be surprising. The Tar Heels, 18 times they've been a number one seed. That is more than anyone in the history of the sport. And typically, when the Tar Heels are a number one seed, they do quite well. Since 1985, they've reached the Final Four 9 of the 14 times they were a number one seed. 4 times they won the national championship. In all, they have 5 titles as a number one seed. Now, it's a disappointment for the Tar Heels to not finish the deal against North Carolina State in the ACC tournament championship game, but they've been playing pretty well. As you look at and really playing their best ball, they probably didn't play their best defensive game against NC State. And Cormac Ryan, couldn't fall out of a boat and hit water in the championship game. But as you look at that bracket overall, there are a couple of physical teams in the way, potentially in a second round matchup with Mississippi State or Michigan State. That would particularly be true for the Bulldogs, I think, that might give Carolina pause. Then you have St. Mary's, which is also an old, physical, tough team, is a 5 seed matched up with Grand Canyon, where they need to be careful. And the 4 seed Alabama against Charleston. Now, that game, I'm not sure that there will be a lot of shots. I would predict very few mid-range shots. Both those teams like to fire up the 3. I think Alabama's in a world of trouble in that game. I really like. I'll go ahead and start with upsets as we look over this. I like Charleston not only to get out of that 4-13 game against Alabama, but I think they are the double-digit seed, one of them every year we have that gets to the Sweet 16. I think Pat Kelsey's team sneaks out of there with with Ante Berzovic and starts knocking down some threes. And Alabama's really good. I think they've masked a lot of deficiencies personnel wise. I also think they're sort of out of gas. So that's the way they've looked the last few weeks to me. So I think this is a great opportunity for Charleston, which has won 12 games in a row, second longest active winning streak going right now. I think this is a great opportunity for them to run to the 16 against Carolina.
Well, we know what good seats you have at these Alabama basketball games, Rece. So we know you've really seen them up close and can really see if they have their hands on their knees.
But that might not happen anymore after making that prediction. Yeah.
My takeaway from this region was going to be if there was one game, if I could fly to one game and watch it of the first round anywhere, it would be Alabama Charleston. I think Alabama will win because I think they're too similar and one is just good enough to overwhelm the other. But I certainly look a 13. You had this stat today, I believe. A 13 has beaten a 4 in what was it, 13 to 14 years, something like that.
What happened last year? I mean, you had teams in the top 4 line who have lost. I think what is it? Can't remember exactly how many years off the top of my head. Here we go. Past 5 tourneys, 14 of the 20 matchups have been decided by single digits. That's the most of any first round seeding. And at least one top 4 seed meaning 1 through 4, has lost in the first round in 14 of the past 15 tournaments. The 4 that got beat last year was Virginia losing to Furman.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and that was it's probably one of the easier ones to pick. I think Charleston will get some juice for that reason. I mean, Alabama's just been so frenetic, right? And that's what they are not designed to. I would tell you this: do not pick Alabama to go deep in the NCAA tournament because they have not proven with that style that they can. This is not one of Nado's best teams, in my opinion. I think he has had better versions of this team. I feel like they've had enough defensive lapses this year, which is unusual for them, where they just haven't earned the reliable trust. But they're still good. They're still talented. They are still prone to, explosion. So I just think that will be a fun game. Those are 2 coaches that could definitely get in a fight on the sideline because of their temperament. So that always, especially at the NCAA tournament, get the good seats. It would certainly be fun to watch those 2 because I think they're, two of the better kind of that age era coaches in college basketball. I think, in what is a little bit of a sleepy West, that is a highlight. Now, if I'm your old coworker Hubert Davis, I am not looking forward to that second round game. I mean,
oh my goodness.
You were just tossed in a meat grinder. You never want to see Izzo on the short turnaround, right? He has that preposterous record in these on the quick turn. And look, Chris Jans is quietly established himself as one of the best coaches in college basketball. He's got Mississippi State to back-to-back tournaments. That doesn't happen magically there. And, his teams play a bruising style that, Carolina has always played balletic, beautiful basketball. It's one of the reasons they're one of the prettiest programs in the country, always has been. So that is they're going into a UFC fight in that second weekend. So that'll be fun. I mean, look, it's virtually every year one of the ones gets knocked off in that second weekend, right? So you certainly don't feel great about that. If you have that second scout at Carolina, that's a long weekend in Charlotte. You're sitting there sweating your palms watching those teams play.
I do think this edition of North Carolina they've been one of the top defensive teams in the country all season. And they're probably a little more, look, they've always had tough teams, but they've been grinders a little bit on defense, a little bit more than maybe you're accustomed to. Harrison Ingram is a terrific defender. And you know what? I think Cormac Ryan's a little underrated. He didn't shoot the ball well in the tournament.
Well, he's 34, so.
Oh, come on. He's only 25. Armando's 24. So they've got an old team. And, Armando had a hilarious line to Jess Sims the other night. If you saw after the game, I guess after the semifinal game in the ACC tournament, I guess Armando passed Ralph Sampson maybe for double-doubles with his 84th double-double. And she asked him, what does it mean to you? And he goes, look, I've been in college a long time. And he has it. And, so is Cormac. And, and Harrison Ingram is a veteran. And though RJ Davis hasn't, traveled around, he's a veteran too. So I think that as tough as Mississippi State is, and I think Michigan State always, plays a bruising style. Tom's probably had teams who are a little more physical than this one over the years. I think Carolina can stand in with either of them, and I just don't see Mississippi State being able, if it's Mississippi State or Michigan State for that matter, being able to stand in there with them offensively and, being able to slow down Baycott. And the whole thing with Carolina is they just need one of those other scores to kind of get going. If Ingram or Ryan get going, because you know what you're getting from RJ and Baycott. And, so because of that, I don't think there's enough firepower there for either of those teams to beat North Carolina. But I will say this, man, Mississippi State, I mean, they opened up a can on Tennessee. I think they caught Tennessee a little flat or whatever. But man, oh man, did they take them apart? And it was impressive.
I always find used to early in my career when I was at the New York Times, I would cover the Big East tournament, which would literally be like 5 days, right? So you see all these teams and you see these great Pitt teams, Ben Howland, Jamie Dixon, and you get mesmerized by the week. You see it in person. You see Pitt out there, Levance Fields, backing people down and punching them in the mat. And you almost have to divorce some recent results, right? And look at the bigger picture and what that may mean. And that's, I think, one of the big challenges of the bracket is we're all binging on basketball, right? We watch all year, but we're binging the last 2 weeks. And now it's like you have to take some of the recent empirical evidence and blend it with the entire mosaic of the season. And yeah, it'll be interesting when we do get to Tennessee. We have Tennessee takes too. To see what, do you just let one stinker in the conference tournament go?
No team has ever lost its first game in its conference tournament and gone on to win the national championship. So that eliminates Tennessee. It eliminates Kentucky. It eliminates Duke. If you buy that. Now there have been teams that have gone to the Final Four, but they haven't won the national championship. So those are challenges. Now, I think Carolina gets to the Elite Eight out of the top half. Bottom half of the bracket, I do have the double-digit seed in Charleston beating Alabama. You do not. 6-11 game in the West is Clemson against New Mexico. Now, I want to love Clemson for a number of reasons. You look at what they should have. They've got big guys. Their big guys are athletic. PJ Hall, Ian Shefflin. Shefflin on the GPS consistently runs faster, longer, jumps higher more often than anybody on the team. They've got that. They've got Joseph Girard, who you know very well from Syracuse, who's an elite shooter. They've got Chase Hunter, who's been around a really long time. Good point guard, can be streaky as a shooter, but he's there. They've got a big guy coming off the bench that can shoot. They've got a big body coming off the bench. And yet, somehow they find a way to mess it up. And
Did you watch
like
BC
them.
toast them in DC?
Yes.
Yeah, I did too. I mean, toasted them.
And even the Saturday before, and I know Wake Forest is a good team, and winning on the road's difficult, but they go in there. They had a couple of chances to secure the double bye. They lose at Notre Dame, and then they come back. They beat Syracuse at home, but then they lose at Wake. They lost at home to Georgia Tech. They lost at home to NC State. Which before State got hot, and because of that, I don't trust them. And I know what you said about the Mountain West earlier. I think Richard Pitino's got a really good, dangerous offensive team. A lot of different guys that can do it. Eddie House's kid, Jalen House, is put on a show. I like New Mexico. I like New Mexico not only to get out of that game, Pete. I feel like I need to seek medical attention for this. I've got New Mexico in the Elite Eight.
Wow.
And I don't know that
some Albuquerque peyote has made its way into Reese's Diet Coke.
Maybe, but I think the thing, here's the reason, because you talked about having a philosophy when you pick these brackets. And my philosophy is this. I realize New Mexico could get stomped in the first round and get out. I'm not sitting here pounding the table telling you that Richard's team's the best team I've ever seen and they're undersold and they're going to do this. What my deal is in that part of the bracket is I don't trust the high seeds. I don't trust the 6 in Clemson. I don't really trust Baylor, and I don't trust Arizona. So I think, okay, Dayton, good, little beaten up. Don't quite trust them to get that far. So why not take the flyer? Because I'm convinced North Carolina comes out of there. After having a decade of having at least one seed make the Final Four, we broke that streak last year. I think we go back to a little normalcy, at least for part of the bracket. So I think Carolina is getting to the Final Four. So I figure in the other part of the bracket is where I take the chance. I think that's the bracket that breaks sort of wide open. So I'll take a flyer and say that New Mexico's the one that makes the run along with Charleston. So I would have 2 double-digit seeds in the Sweet 16 of the West, sort of taking a flyer on teams that I either think have sort of hit the wall or ones that I don't trust. So that's kind of my philosophy on it.
Fair philosophy. One of my great philosophies is to not do what Jay Wright did on CBS today and pick all 4 number 1 seeds. Because
that's part of it too. Because the 4, and I want to defend Jay a little bit on that, because when they tell us when we do these shows and they want to have, and probably fortunately for me, we were tied on time, so I didn't do mine. But they tell us we have to fill out the bracket in the breaks, right? So you're going through it hurriedly and you got to hand it in so they can build a graphic. And it's the 1 seeds are the 1 seeds for a reason. They're the better team.
They're good.
So
they're really
why
good.
are you picking the better team to lose? So I understand it. So, you just kind of try to have some fun with it here and there.
Yeah. No, that's fine. And I'm just having fun with Jay Wright. You always defend the people with impeccable hair like yourself. So
that's true.
It makes sense. So I'm going to be so bold as to pick Arizona, the 2 seed in there.
Okay.
I've seen the weaknesses, but I like the age. I like the size. I like Tommy Lloyd with a little bit of more head coaching under his belt in the postseason. I feel like Kylan Boswell is a guy for them that is really, really interesting to me because he can come off and fill it. Or at least he can sort of be that second wheel, like you're talking about with Carolina. Like, what you're getting from Caleb Love. Ballo's going to fill it. Larson's been reliable. Boswell's the guy who kind of takes him to the extra gear. So I am, I'm intrigued by them, and I think their flaws can be overcome. And that's where I'm gonna go there. I wanted to, like, sitting watching the show today, be like, all right, we're getting all these 5, 6s, 7s. I wanted to pick a Final Four team outside of the 1 to 4 matrix, and I don't think I have the gumption to do it. You know what I mean? Like, no one's picking FAU, right? Like, just off the cuff. And God bless UConn. Like, UConn could have one of the hardest roads to the national title that anyone's ever had if the seeds hold, right? So I did not know but that Waterboy was filmed at Stetson, by the way. That was a great nugget. That was a great nugget.
Did you like that one? I thought so. That's Stetson's a 16 up in the East. It will open against UConn. And you brought up Arizona and some of the experience. Think about this. They have, even though Arizona hasn't been there in a while, they have 2 guys on their team who've played in the national championship game, and Caleb Love from North Carolina, and what theater it would be if R.J. Davis and Caleb Love are going head to head in the Elite Eight, and Keyshawn Johnson, who played for San Diego State last year and transferred to Arizona. So you have that in addition to Larson and Ballo, returning. So certainly Arizona has some tournament experience to offset some of their tournament struggles that they've had, from losing to Princeton last year in the 2-15 matchup. And, I'm scrolling through here to refresh my memory. They won the national championship in 1997. I think the year that they lost to Jay Williams' team in 2001, Duke, is the last time they've been to the Final Four. So, they've had 3 Elite Eight losses since 2010. And look, they're right there on that cusp. We talked about UConn and Auburn both being top 10, or in UConn's case, I think top 11 in offensive and defensive efficiency. I think Arizona is probably top 12 or so in both. So they certainly have the characteristics of teams that can win a national championship. And yet they, on occasion this year, as a lot of teams did, sort of turned in these inexplicable clunkers. The loss to Oregon in the Pac-12 conference tournament. They lost their final regular season game to USC, of all people. I mean, I understand they had the conference regular season wrapped up, but they also had a game against Washington State at home a few weeks before that they lost. They got swept by Washington State. It was a game where they could sort of lock up the conference. Instead, they opened up the door for Wazoo to win the regular season, and Wazoo subsequently gave it back. But they've turned in these weird stinkers, and they lost to Florida Atlantic in the regular season. They lost to Purdue, so they're a really good team, and they could go to the Final Four, especially being in Phoenix. That would be quite an accomplishment for them. But they've scared me off with the clunkers, and so I'll say they get clipped on the way, and that Carolina ends up going to the Final Four there.
That's right. 01 was their last Final Four. Yeah. I think I've covered every Final Four since 02. I've never covered Arizona in a Final Four, and it's a pretty long gap for that program. What's your overall Pac-12 belief, Rece? And then we'll make our picks and get it. Well, we made our picks already. We'll get out of the way.
Yeah, the final edition of this Pac-12.
Yeah, like what's your conviction as we talk strategy for our listeners on the Pac-12?
I think Arizona's really good. I think you should pick Oregon in its first round game against South Carolina, simply because as the head coach of the Ducks, Dana Altman is 7-0 in first round games. He seems to figure that out. I think Washington State's had a great season. They've got a really good team, and I think they've sort of hit the wall as well. I think they're kind of they might be out of gas. And don't be hoodwinked and underestimate Colorado. Colorado has a first 4 game against Boise State, then a potential matchup against Florida, which we'll get to when we get to the South region. But so I don't expect much from the Pac-12 outside of Arizona. I think Arizona gets at least to the Sweet 16. That's where I have them getting clipped. Not going to surprise me if they make it further, even to the Final Four. But I'm going to stay with my conviction that I'm a little bit afraid of them, and I don't really have a lot of belief that those other teams in the Pac-12 have the characteristics of teams that will make a deep run.
Yeah, Colorado has one of the 5 best draft prospects playing in college basketball. Now, the whole paradigm of that has changed. This draft in particular, and our friend Jonathan Gavoni, who does such a great job breaking down the draft and doing mocks for us, has detailed this all season. But half of the lottery are going to be foreign players who didn't play college basketball. But Cody Williams, who's kind of the 6'8" wing, who's been very good for Colorado this year, is that kind of guy who can and look, he was wearing a mask this year. He's had some injuries. Like, we haven't seen him at his best, but all of a sudden, this is a guy who can turn it on and lead them to a couple wins. Like you mentioned Terrence Shannon earlier, like he is the caliber of talent who can carry a team for a little bit.
They've won 8 in a row before losing the conference tournament championship game. So they're playing good ball, open up against Boise State on Wednesday in the first 4. So who are you picking? Are you picking Arizona to come out of there then?
Pick Arizona to come out of there. I'm going to go wild and pick a 2.
Okay. Well, I promise you, full chalk is not going to consume my bracket. But at the moment, I've got 1 seed UConn coming out of the East and 1 seed North Carolina coming out of the West. We'll continue our tournament previews. The College Game Day podcast still to go. If you've listened to the first edition, the South and the Midwest. Will I avoid being a chalk-eating weasel once we pick those? Here on the College Game Day podcast, we continue to work our way through the bracket, the field of 68. Rece Davis and Pete Thamel with you. We are now turning our attention to the South region, where the Houston Cougars are the number 1 seed. As we record this podcast, the latest AP poll has not come out, but I severely doubt that Houston will remain number one after the thumping that they took at the hands of Iowa State in the Big 12 championship game. Still, Kelvin Sampson has an elite team and one that is capable of winning the national championship. As I look over Houston's path in the South, there are plenty of potholes in store. They have a potential game in the second round against Texas A&M if they get past Nebraska. A&M played Houston earlier this year to a 4-point game. Wisconsin, who got to the championship game in the Big Ten's in that side. Duke is in that side. ACC tournament champion NC State. Kentucky's as good an offensive team as there is in the country. They're the 3 seed in that bracket. And then Marquette is the 2 in the South, too. If we get, and we'll make some picks, Pete, this is something that seems odd. It's one of those tournament oddities. If Kentucky and Marquette, if form holds and they play in the Sweet 16, it will be the 11th time that they've played in the tournament. That, of all things, is the most common matchup in tournament history, Kentucky and Marquette.
Wow. So we had takeaways. We had to bring in things we felt conviction about in the bracket. I have conviction that NC State is going to fall squarely on its face and lose. I've seen this play before. I saw Syracuse run through the Big East tournament with Jerry McNamara, the famous Jim Boeheim. We wouldn't have won like 8 effing games or whatever it was. And that team laid a dinosaur egg against Texas A&M in the first round. If you look at the history of the teams that make Magic Conference tournament runs to steal bids, they do not have great results the following week because they're going to go back to campus and they are going to be the cat's pajamas all week. And they have accomplished, look, that's one of the great accomplishments in the history of NC State basketball. How about Kevin Keith's getting 2 years on that too, by the way?
He, not only that, Pete, he was in trouble. I really believe that. And I don't know if you don't know if he actually was, but man, was there noise. Their fans were unhappy, tired of being, third fiddle, which are always going to be to some degree, but really unhappy about not being in the mix. They weren't under consideration. And, then here they go. And think about fate, right? Because if that shot for Michael O'Connell doesn't go in, the bank shot to send the game to overtime against Virginia, if that doesn't go in, okay, they don't play in the championship game, and now you're left with an upset fan base who, they're happy they upset Duke, but then they turn around and lost to Virginia. And so what did we really do? We just pulled another upset. Are we going in the right direction? Well, instead, the ball goes in, you win in overtime, you outplay North Carolina, you win the championship, and the 2-year extension and the raise, and now everything seems settled in the entire program, and it's all because of friendly nighttime banking hours in our nation's capital for the Stanford transfer, the latest Stanford transfer. Yeah, how well do you think a team just comprised of Stanford transfers would do in the NCAA tournament? Probably pretty well. You'd have Cormac Ryan, you'd have Harrison Ingram, you'd have O'Connell. Sure, there are a couple others that are escaping me right now, but
my favorite is Winthrop transfer DJ Burns, who was, I think, a Tennessee transfer before that. Because my gosh, he was fun to watch play. Oh, he was really, really fun to watch play for 5 straight days. Soft touch, uses those hips in that derriere, and there was he probably should have been a left tackle, Rece, if we really had to get into it. But man, he was just a blast to watch, and played with a great joy too. You know what I mean? That it emanated off of him. You tell his teammates fed off him. That was a lot of fun. So I apologize for being a wet blank. I also think Texas Tech's pretty good.
I agree on both counts, and I am completely convicted on that as well. And I said we were coming back to Bristol after the thing last night, and I said, man, it was a great run for them. I'm happy for them, happy for Boo Corrigan, who, given what he went through with the college football playoff stuff and some of the nonsense from fringe of the fans, it was good for Boo to have a real feel-good moment. Good for Kevin Keith, who's a good guy and a good coach. And, happy for their players who just played their tails off against Duke. And, they had the weird thing against Duke where Ben Middlebrooks missed the dunk, then got called for a technical hanging on the rim. And you thought, are they going to blow this game after having it in hand? And they didn't. And so it was a great moment. But we were on the plane, and I said, I don't care who they're matched up against. I don't care their seed. So much, not only physical energy, but emotional energy spent winning 5 games in 5 days, beating the two teams you despised the most along the way, the one you really despised the most for the championship on Saturday night. And that followed an emotional overtime win where you sort of snatched victory from the jaws of defeat, got a break with some missed free throws from Virginia, which maybe in Virginia's case might come to be expected right now, the way they've struggled at the free throw line. But I'm with you. I'm a big believer in that emotional thing, and that's part of the art and luck of picking the tournament is try to figure out where these teams are emotionally and mentally. And I figure NC State is probably one of those teams right at the wall. So I'm going with Texas Tech in that one. That's not an upset in terms of seed line, but it's one that I'm absolutely convinced will happen because of those factors.
And that's a Thursday game, which means they're probably getting on a plane on Tuesday. So they're barely out of their ice bath coming back from DC, and they're already on their way to Pittsburgh.
Have you seen tip time for that too? And I'll tell you why.
I have tip times up here.
What is the tip time of that game? And I'll tell you why I'm bringing it up too is because Mohamed Diarra, who played exceptionally well for North Carolina State throughout the ACC tournament, is observing Ramadan. And, he was able to get sustenance after sundown. And NC State, I think every game they played, I know obviously quarterfinal on, all were after sundown. But I even think their early games were too. So they haven't had to play early. Do they play early?
9:40 p.m.
Well, maybe the roll's still going for the old Wolf Pack. You never know, right?
Yeah, plenty of time to get hydrated and get fed and get back.
And Sean's been good enough to look that up and confirm this for us. So Mohamed Diarra of NC State will be continuing to observe Ramadan, which runs until April 9th, which is the day after the national championship game. So he'll continue to do that. A more pressing concern because Mohamed's handled that just fine up to this point. And we've seen many players over the years who are accustomed to it because it's part of their lifestyle. Perhaps of greater significance to NC State would be the health of Casey Morsell, who injured a groin, was being worked on throughout the latter stages of that North Carolina game. Will he be able to go or be close to full strength? And he's a physical guard, about 6'3", got great leaping ability, can guard a lot of different positions. Losing him for a team that has a little tendency to get in some foul trouble could be a big issue as well.
Let me add this on Morsell. He played at St. John's College High in D.C. For my friend Pat Bean, who we chronicled last year, Rece, during the Final Four, is battling ALS. And so Pat put up on social media his team and Behan Strong, him watching Casey all 5 days. He was awfully proud of him. So that gave me some chill bumps to see Casey Morsell win and make a guy who's in a fight right now put a smile on his face. So I was obviously rooting hard for Casey.
But I do have an upset that I'm picking in there. I think the team with the nation's longest winning streak, a team that I've seen in person this year from our college game day football trip to Harrisonburg.
I watched some practice. I didn't get to go to the game.
I'm gonna take James Madison to clip Wisconsin. This is a really good Wisconsin team. Played really well in the Big Ten tournament. But you got to take a flyer every now and then. So I'll take JMU to pull the upset there.
Yeah, I have that one too. Some of it is bias from having seen them play. They were fresh off that Michigan State victory there, but they're also 31-3. Now, that Sun Belt is like a big old geographic mess, but there's some good basketball teams in that Sun Belt. There's no easy road games when you're in Lafayette, Louisiana, and Hattiesburg, Mississippi, and those kinds of places. So give Mark Byington credit. That guy's won a lot of basketball games, and I believe this is his first NCAA tournament as a coach. He's won some leagues, but they didn't make it last year, did they?
This is their first appearance since 2013. For them, they're a pretty good 3-point shooting team. You mentioned the great start they got off to, and for the Sun Belt, those 31 wins, most ever for a Sun Belt team going into the tournament. So
yeah, no, I just think, and look, Wisconsin played really well this week.
yeah.
They didn't close the deal, but they are playing well, and they've been at times looked really good. But I think when we go back to conviction and strategy, obviously the last Big Ten team to win the NCAA tournament, Rece, right?
I think it's Michigan State in 2000.
2000. Yeah.
Yeah.
So it's just like there is a little bit of and then look, Purdue could win the darn thing. They're really good, right? Um, but I do think there is some in this year's Big Ten has been very good. But you get sort of these upper middle class teams that have some vulnerabilities, James Madison isn't going to blink. Like that's the thing. So I would think there'll be a spunky crowd in Brooklyn ready to back the Dukes. So I'm with you on that one.
Are you into Kentucky?
Man,
Probably
not
have
as
the
much as
best.
Seth, right?
Well, I mean, Seth loves Kentucky, but you know what? Here's something, Pete. And look, we're fortunate we get to see a lot of teams in person. And Kentucky has been awful on defense for much of the year. But we were in Auburn, one of the toughest places to play in college basketball, against a team that we both believe Final Four caliber team, maybe not given their draw in its opposite UConn in the Sweet 16, but a Final Four caliber team nonetheless. And Kentucky guarded. And Bruce Pearl has said that Kentucky played as well defensively as anyone has played them all year. And their offense is ridiculous.
They pumped them that night, right? They beat them by like 15,
yeah. They're going to get 85 rolling out of bed. The question is, are they going to give up 95? And so if they'll just guard a little, and I think this is something Cal has been great about. He's like, we don't have to be the best defensive team in the world. We just kind of have to be a little bit better. And they were not any better. The other night against Texas A&M, but I kind of like Kentucky to make a little run here. I really do. I get enamored. I like the teams that can put the ball in the bucket, and man, they can put the ball in the bucket.
So let me start my Kentucky by saying the Greg Kampe, John Calipari matchup may be the two most different coaches to take the sideline in the NCAA tournament. Greg Kampe, I believe, has been at Oakland for 40 years.
That's right. Mm-hmm.
And he has a very good team, as he's done a very good job there, and he's brought a bunch of teams to the tournament. Trey Townsend, who's his star player this year, who averages this.
Well, he got 36 in the championship game.
Yes, averaging 17 a game. Yeah, 17 and 8. He's a big time guy. He's got Rocket Watts too playing in a complimentary role there. Obviously, people remember him from Michigan State. But Kampe is just sort of this like no nonsense. He was like working the drive-through at McDonald's to like raise money for NIL the other day. And John, especially Cal, going back to Pittsburgh where he's from Moon, Pennsylvania. There'll be plenty of Cal soliloquies from the pulpit, as you can imagine. So those would be very interesting press conferences to see.
On Kampe is that was their first time since they joined the Horizon 10 years ago to win that league. Townsend had the great thing, and did you see the story? Trey Townsend went to Greg Kampe's basketball camp as a 5-year-old. And now he's his star player. And these guys now they're not going to be overwhelmed emotionally by playing Kentucky because they've played, they played Drake, they played Michigan State, played Illinois, played Dayton, played Ohio State. Now Kentucky may be better than all of those teams, maybe not, you might argue Illinois. But even so, those are all the big time team being on the opposing them on the floor will not discourage or overwhelm Oakland. I don't think Kentucky probably will from a talent standpoint, and I think they win the game. But Oakland, I could see Oakland giving them a fight for a little while.
Yeah, Reed Sheppard's been unbelievable to watch this year. He has closed the season. I obviously I remember when he was in high school, the big question was, are they going to offer him because of who his dad was? And he eventually, grew into a top player and top recruit. But I don't think anybody coming into this season said, "Oh yeah, this kid's going to be a top 10 pick." So credit to him. I mean, his development has soared, and he's been an awesome player. I mean, they've taken. Wagner's the third generation Wagner, who I
DJ
thought would
Wagner,
be,
yeah.
yeah, DJ
Yeah.
Wagner. I was getting all the Wagners mixed up in my head because I'm getting old because I covered Wani back in the day when he was at Memphis. Yeah, DJ Wagner from Camden, like, was probably going to be one of the 10 best players in the country. He's been a nice player and he's okay this year, but Reed Sheppard and Dillingham have obviously just soared and taken over. So certainly the talent of Kentucky you can never question, but they're going to have to guard for 6 games, Rece, and I don't know if you can trust them to do that. But where it's also going to, like, picking the team and putting them out of the bracket is not going to be an easy thing to do.
And especially if Marquette is without Tyler Kolek, who has missed some time and missed the Big East tournament with the oblique injury. And Marquette's the 2 seed in there, and they'll start with Western Kentucky. But, I've got Kentucky making it to the Elite Eight in the bottom half of that. The interesting part at the top is Houston. How do you feel about Houston? Houston comes in to the tournament off that 28-point loss at the hands of Iowa State. That loss is the worst ever for a team as they head into the NCAA tournament and then went on and got a number 1 seed. There have been some teams who have lost by 20, but the 28-point margin, and if you watch the end of the game, and I don't know why you would unless you like to watch people just, getting fist pounded into their face. They scored some garbage time points to get to 41 and to get that under 30. Iowa State had them down in the 30s. Now, Houston's had some injuries up front, so the rotation's a little bit thinner than it was. They don't have a big margin for error in terms of people having an off night. LJ Cryer has to score. Emmanuel Sharp, who's been really good, has to help them out scoring, and you know what you're getting from Shed. So I don't think there's a big margin for error there. If they get A&M in the second round, that's already, as I mentioned earlier, that's been a 4-point game. I don't love the way Duke is playing right now, having lost its last 2 games. But I've got Duke clipping them. I think somebody's going to clip them.
Yeah.
I think somebody's going to clip them. And in fact, I'm looking at my handwritten bracket that I did, and I first put Houston through, and then I was like, it's just, I don't know. I feel like they'll get stuck in one of those games, and so I'm going to take the Blue Devils to get there and get to the Elite Eight against Kentucky.
Wow, that's Duke conviction. The talent is certainly there, right? And they have some age to go with the talent with Jeremy Roach, and Filipowski's obviously played well down the stretch. I like this Marquette team, and I would feel it's just hard if you don't really know the status of Tyler Kolek to really ride him for a couple weeks. I'll tell you what, like, I really was, if there was a, like, 4, 5, 6, 7 or 5, 6, 7 seed that I was going to maybe ride, I was thinking about Florida, right? Like, they are talented, they flash. Now look, they lost to Vanderbilt in the last 3 weeks, right? So there's some there, but, like, they have great guards. Walker Clayton, who came there from Iona, is one of the better guards in the country. He's older, he's been there, and they're talented enough where they could make that kind of run. But boy, when Michael Handlogton?
Micah Handlogton, yes.
Handlogton, yes. Okay, so it's phonetic, yeah. When he broke his leg, it's like, ooh, like that. Yeah, just an awful injury in the SEC tournament that happened today, and he was obviously taken off as a stretcher. And then you say, okay, they were a team with a bunch of pieces, and that's why you liked them. And then you're like, if they take that piece away, so. But that said, there's always, like, a team that just sort of overcomes something and goes. So, I'm not going to pick Florida to the Final Four, but I think I'm going to take them to the Elite Eight.
Mm-hmm.
And you know what? I'm going to take them to the Final Four, Rece.
Okay.
Let's do it. You need.
You know,
I feel like you need one outside the top four. So I'm gonna go with the Gators. I know what they. I know the recent events might not dictate that, but I just feel like that's probably a 3-4 seed of talent.
mhm.
Um, as a 7, soft bracket around. So yeah, I'm gonna give them like they're not going to blink at Marquette.
Right. I don't hate that pick at all. The thing I liked about Hanlogton is he really helped them on the offensive boards. He had such length. He covered up at times some of their defensive deficiencies by his pure size and being able to protect the rim. Now they still have some guys with size, but man, do they have some other guys who can really score. And so I don't dislike that pick at all. Now I'm taking Duke to the Final Four. And it's mostly because of I've gotten nervous about Houston and Tyler Kolek's injury. So, and also I probably like Kentucky's talent best, but like you, do I trust them not to turn in a game where they just give up multiple straight line drives to the basket for layups, which is what they've done a lot. And I think because of that, I'm going to say Duke beats Kentucky in another Elite Eight game that probably won't be quite as epic as the one in 1992, but still will probably be entertaining as well. So we have Duke to the Final Four, and we have Florida to the Final Four out of the South region as we continue our bracket breakdowns. There is one team in the NCAA tournament that enters with more baggage than any other, and it's the Purdue Boilermakers. Purdue lost to Fairleigh Dickinson last year. They lost to St. Peter's the tournament before that, and they lost to North Texas as a 13 seed the tournament before that. And I do know that the St. Peter's loss was not in the first round, but it was a 15 seed nonetheless, and they lost in the Sweet 16. So we continue our look at the field of 68, projecting our brackets here on the College Game Day podcast. Rece Davis and Pete Thamel, and Purdue is the number 1 seed in the Midwest. And for a team that I think has the greatest emotional burden of any other in this tournament, I would say they would have to look at that bracket and go, that's pretty good. That's pretty good to, at the very least, get a run to the Elite Eight, because in their half of it, the 4 seed is Kansas. The status of Kevin McCullough, highly in question. The status of Hunter Dickinson with the injured shoulder, also somewhat in question, if not highly in question. That's wide open for Purdue. They are the first team to lose in 3 consecutive tournaments to teams seeded 13 or lower. They really have to get it done right now as they open with the winner of Montana State and Grambling and get the winner of Utah State and TCU after that.
Yeah, I mean, that is, I think, as tournament storylines go, Rece, other than UConn's repeat, like, can Purdue exit this house of NCAA tournament horrors? What's their last Final Four? 1980?
Yes, that's right.
Yeah, 1980. Obviously they're part of this Big Ten run of not winning a title since 2000. Yeah, as I was watching the Midwest unfold, I was like, wow. But my takeaway from the Midwest is on the other tortured coach who could exercise some demons, and that is our friend Rick Barnes. They have lost to lower seeds 5 consecutive years. Those have included number 9 FAU last year in the Sweet 16. They lost to Michigan as an 11, which is a little wishy-washy. Number 12 Oregon State in the first round, and then they were part of number 11 Loyola's march to the Final Four in 2018. Rick Barnes, this is I busted this stat out before for our pods in the NCAA tournament, is 0-5 in 8-9 games as an NCAA tournament coach. He's 27-27 as an NCAA tournament head coach. He's 0-9 in 8-9. 0-5 in 8-9 games. So it's, first of all, hard to get in 5-8-9 games, and second of all, to go 0-5 in them. So those two, I think one of those two, I think, is going to come out of this bracket, and one of them is going to shake some demons. Now, Rick Barnes has made the Final Four. He did it with TJ Ford in Texas in 03. Obviously, Tennessee played awful in the SEC tournament, but certainly there's a lot to like. I know you've been a fan of them this year, Rece, having seen them. So I do think one of those coaches, Matt Painter or Rick Barnes, busts out of this Midwest this year and gets a zoo full of monkeys off his back.
The Purdue storyline is my biggest takeaway. Tennessee's right there, but I want to turn your attention to the potential round of 32 second round matchup at the bottom of the bracket involving our friend Rick Barnes, and it might be against Texas. Texas is the 7th seed there, and of course that could come around a little more often in coming years once Texas moves to the SEC next season. But Rick Barnes had the great success at Texas. His exit press conference when they decided they wanted to move on from him and was asked if he would coach again, he said, sooner than you can imagine. And he was on a plane to Tennessee, and he's done an unbelievable job at Tennessee. And I just wonder if you have the proverbial gorilla on your back in the tournament, as Purdue does and as Tennessee does, because for all the great stars Tennessee has had over the years, Bernard King, Ernie Grunfeld, Dale Ellis, Allen Houston, Chris Lofton, they've never made the Final Four. 26 NCAA tournament appearance, no Final Fours. So if you're going to exercise the demons, why not just get all of them and beat Texas in the second round and then try to make a run on and see what happens the rest of the way? So those are big takeaways from a really interesting region. Do you have upsets? I've got to believe that you have some double-digit seeds moving in the Midwest.
I do. I did like that your southern proclivities wouldn't allow you to say strong ass on television when you tried to make a joke about Will Wade's strong ass offer. So feel free to beep that out if we can't say those, by the way. My Northeast background doesn't make me hesitate when I pause that. Rece is more of a God-fearing, better person than me. But I don't think that Gonzaga is going to lose to McNeese and Will Wade, but I do think that's a fascinating game, especially because Mark Few, during the college basketball federal investigation, was one of the more outspoken coaches about the punishment of people like Will Wade. So Will Wade is fascinating theater, man. The guy's a good coach. The guy is brazen. He's crazy. He's brash, and he is not going to be boring for whatever region he shows up in. He was suspended for the NCAA tournament it was the Zion Williamson when they were in DC. So whatever that year would have been.
2019, I believe.
Yeah. Well, and look, man, the guy went 30-3. It's like, he's, their talent follows and wins follow, and not so subtle storylines. But my upset is Buckyball. I am taking Samford to beat Kansas. Now, some of this is look, they play an awesome style. It's a great story. He clearly just runs up tempo offense and is one of the most dynamic young coaches in the country. Kansas is beat up, and you can't reliably pick this Kansas team to go deep. This is just, in terms of Big 12 finishes, this is one of Bill Self's worst teams. They have petered down the stretch. Obviously, you mentioned the injuries to Dickinson and McCullough. So why not just have like the ultimate spunk first round team in Samford jump on Kansas and send him home? Because if not, I think that they get sent home pretty fast by Gonzaga or whoever else they played quick there. So that's my double digit upset. I don't disagree with you on Dana Altman, like in taking Oregon there. The guy's a wizard of a coach, and he's good. I do think there's a good South Carolina team. Yeah, pretty easy and obvious one there. So those are mine. Are you going to take the strong ass upset, Rece? Did you pick that?
I am.
You did. Okay.
I'm taking all of them actually in this bracket. I'm taking McNeese to get Gonzaga. This is a really good Gonzaga team because all of his teams are really good teams. It's not one of the best ones. I think McNeese has a chance to get them. I think Samford will get Kansas for all of the reasons you mentioned. And then I'm gonna give McNeese a little bit of an edge against Samford, and I think McNeese will go to the Sweet 16, and Purdue will get there against them and think, why couldn't we have like someone that it wouldn't be embarrassing to lose to. And what I mean by that is not that the team is embarrassing, it's the name, because you're Purdue. You know, if you get knocked out in the Sweet 16, you want to get knocked out by another, not that you want to, but you can live with it easier, it seems, and people don't tell you about it forever and ever and ever if it's another power team, you know, a power conference team. Better yet, if it's a blue blood who is seeded low, like Syracuse getting a double-digit seed and then bouncing you out, you know, well, people don't talk about that forever. If Purdue loses to McNeese or Samford, for that matter, if they get there, they'll say, well, it happened again. Look at them again. So that will be the real challenging moment. But I think both those teams win. I think Oregon beats South Carolina. I really admire what the Gamecocks have done this year. I mean, they were picked with Lamont Paris as their head coach to finish dead last in the SEC. Instead, they played their way into a 5 seed in the conference tournament. They were in the fight for the regular season championship until deep in the season, and they go into this NCAA tournament as a 6 seed. Probably worth mentioning that they're in the tournament for the first time since they went to the Final Four behind their buddy Frank Martin in 2017. And it's the only time they had been in the tournament in the previous 19 seasons. And they go from being picked last to getting into the tournament. I think it'll be a short visit, but, you know, quite an accomplishment to get there. I like Creighton to move on there and get in the Sweet 16. Creighton against Tennessee will be a huge matchup for the Volunteers, who I think will get past Texas. And then we've got Tennessee, Purdue, trying one of them. One of them has to win. If they get there, somebody has to go to the Final Four if Purdue and Tennessee play. And I said I was going to do it before. They scared me with the way they played a little bit, but not enough to go against what I said. I said I was going to pick Tennessee unless or until they ran into UConn. So that's what I'm doing. I've got Tennessee for the first time ever going to the Final Four.
So before, I'm going to be talkative and undisciplined here, because one thing we didn't hit on, which I think is interesting, is the Big East. They have a 1 seed, a 2 seed, a 3 seed, and no other seeds.
Nobody else.
Nobody else. Did you think that was fair?
I didn't think it was unfair, and I'm not trying to straddle the line. But if you're asking me, kind of look at these teams at the end of the line. If you're asking me if I think St. John's is better than Virginia, better than Colorado State, yes, I do. But is it close enough that reasonable minds can differ, and you could go to the paper and you can, I get it, the Mountain West teams, maybe not Virginia. Virginia has finished third in the ACC, was their biggest thing. And they had some, decent wins, also had some terrible, terrible losses. So I would have taken St. John's, Seton Hall, and probably Providence over some of these teams, but it was not such a margin in my mind that I thought it was something that you can pound your fist on the table and say this is an outrage and a travesty and all of that stuff, because those teams left the door open for the other teams when they couldn't close the deal. I was a little surprised that one of them didn't make it. I kind of thought it would be St. John's, but I think if memory serves, that Seton Hall actually, I think, I could be wrong about that, was on the committee's list ranked a little bit higher.
They were. And yeah, I don't get too outraged over like the 68 versus 69 bubble stuff. Yeah, it's just, you had plenty of chances. So, but I did only bring that up because I thought from a league standpoint, it was interesting. The 3 Big East teams, a great basketball league, some metrics had it the second best league, didn't have anyone in past the third. And yeah, I just thought that was an interesting quirk. And there's, it was a fair, just sort of a fair volleying point here to chatter on a little bit.
I think to bring that up and kind of tie it back, look at Northwestern. Northwestern's firmly in the field. They've lost some players to injury. They haven't played, probably haven't played their best ball. Now they played Purdue, really well when they saw them. So that probably was a big mark in their favor. But it's funny, I think when you do that, that exercise and getting to 68, that some teams like get to a point maybe with their resumes and watching them as well, and you decide, well, that's a tournament team. I mean, you meaning, as a selection committee member. And at some point, you have to parse out these other teams who are maybe either making a late push or they've really had a significant drop off that puts them in that bubble area. And some teams sort of slip through unscathed and, maybe didn't get quite the scrutiny that one would expect. And there are several in that category. I was a little surprised Virginia made it, to be honest. And then, Northwestern not being anywhere close to the cut line, it doesn't look like, might be a little bit surprising as well.
Yeah. Anyway, I didn't want to hijack it, but I just thought that would organically come up at some point, and it was kind of I thought that was I got a few, being a Northeast guy, I got a few text messages from some Northeast guys on the staffs at those places about that. So
yeah, I mean, it was a great league, great theater. In the Big East tournament every year, and they've got the best team. And if Tyler Kolek is healthy, they've got another Final Four caliber team in Marquette for sure. So in Creighton as well. So yeah, I can understand why they're upset, but it's a really interesting thing. Billis brought up the notion about fixating on non-conference schedules, which probably really hurt Pittsburgh, might have hurt Oklahoma, who I didn't think Oklahoma was a tournament team anyway, but might have hurt them. I'm not sure why we do that if we're doing a full body of work. And just, because the full body of work definition, if you don't play a great non-conference schedule, it is going to drag you down. I don't know that there's the need to differentiate between your conference and non-conference games. I mean, it just seems to me that you would say, okay, if you went out and played no one earlier, I know they want to encourage the scheduling, but the leagues are huge now. They want to encourage the scheduling, but if you play no one, that's going to drag your numbers down and give you fewer opportunities to have impressive wins or even impressive losses. Because if you put up 10 or 11 losses, but the vast majority of your losses are against elite teams, that's going to help you. I mean, heck, I mean, look at Alabama. I mean, they're entertaining and fun to watch. They played everybody in the world, but they lost to almost all of them. And now they played them close. They played Purdue's 2-possession game, Creighton on the road. Their place was I think a 1-possession game. They lost. And, and that certainly helped them. So I guess if you're going to allow it to help, you have to cause it to hurt. But I think it's a better way to look at it. What was your overall schedule? How did it rank? How many times did you play these elite teams, whether in conference or out of conference? And then you can give credit or take credit away based on that. Okay, so we've got that last bracket. Who do you have coming out of there?
So I'm going to take Tennessee, which is going to make it lame because we're going to have the same title game. We're going to have Tennessee. I'm going to have Tennessee, UConn, and you are too. So
yeah, I do too.
Yeah,
and I have UConn winning. We're going to have the same. So do we have? Oh, okay, we've got one difference in the final. No, two differences in the Final Four because who did you take out of the
Arizona,
South?
And then I took Florida, which I'm already regretting with the Fire of a Thousand Suns.
Yeah. Well, I've got New Mexico in the Elite Eight. You think I'm not regretting that? But I hope Richard Pitino proves me right. But
Richard Pitino's of the Northeast as well. He likes to mock me when I tweet obscure UConn position coach hires in football. Yeah. He'll be like, "Don't you have anything better to do?" So, Richard Pitino, thanks for nothing.
I've got Duke coming out of there. You've got Florida. I've got North Carolina. You've got Arizona. We both have Tennessee and UConn, and that happens to be our championship game, which we apologize. We deeply apologize to Tennessee and to UConn, who now probably have zero chance. Did you hear the line Ian Eagle had about announcer jinxes and such things?
I did not hear that.
He said something today. He said, so much power for one man.
He's really good at his job. That guy's really good at his job.
He is. As are you, my friend. As are our producers, Adrian and Sean. That is our preview of the championship. Let me ask you this one obscure question. And I wanted to get to this on the show tonight, I didn't. So you get to be the one. UConn is the reasonable choice. It's the smart choice. They're the best team, regardless of whether they win. They're the best team. If forced to take UConn off the board, or if you found out, say, UConn's going to go play in that money tournament over there that they talked about making in Las Vegas, they're not going to play. If you just couldn't take UConn, would it be that easy? Would you just move Tennessee into that spot, or is there someone else you would take to win the national championship if you took UConn off the board?
Yeah, and again, this is counterintuitive because I picked Arizona, but some of it was I just didn't want to go too chalky on the ones. I would think Tennessee, Carolina would be my coin flip if UConn, just got wiped off the board. If they were deemed ineligible and were not in the tournament, I would probably go with one of those two chalk eaters.
All right. Enjoy the games. We will. And then feel free to mock us, which I'm sure you will. And don't blame us when the brackets get busted. Pete's doing the gator chomp for those of you watching. Thanks for listening. Download these podcasts wherever you prefer to get them. Better yet, subscribe.